Hi, my name is Hailey Delaune, and today we're going to learn a little bit about the Old Testament. So, you might have heard of it. It's a pretty famous book. It's called the Bible, right? But what you may not know is the word Bible actually means library. We have a pretty nice one here in Albany. Maybe you've been to it. And when you walk into the library, you're going to see all different kinds of books. So you might see books, nonfiction books, biographies, you might see fiction stories, you might see historical novels and different things like that, newspapers, all different genres of books. And just like the library in Albany, the Bible, which means library, also contains many different books that are all different types of genres, different styles of writing to tell us about God's love for us. And this Bible is made up in a really interesting way. So we have 46 books in the first part, and the first part of the Bible is called the Old Testament. And then we have 27 books in the second half of the Bible. It's a little bit shorter, and this makes up our New Testament. And the Old Testament, if we look at it, the Old Testament is the story of all the prophets and all the people, God's people, preparing for a special Savior who is coming in the New Testament, which we could all probably guess is Jesus. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the characters from the Old Testament. So in the Old Testament, the first half of the Bible, we start to hear stories that were passed down through time from person to person. Kind of like if you look at maybe an old picture album at your house, and you flip through it, and your parents might tell you stories about the different people in the pictures. And that way, when you grow up, you can tell your kids about those stories, and your kids can tell their kids, and so on and so forth. Well, the Bible takes those handed down stories and records them for us. Even now in the year 2021, we can read those stories, which is great, and we can remember God's love for us. And so, in the Old Testament, we're going to talk about a couple of different people who made God's love known to us through things that you might have heard about from your teachers called covenants. Covenants are God's promise to us. It's an unbreakable promise. And we can make those covenants in our own lives with our families, and maybe one day when we get married, we can make a covenantal vow. But God makes these covenants, these unbreakable promises to us. He never abandons us. And that's the majority of the message of the Old Testament, is that no matter what we do, as long as we come back to God, God is always there waiting for us. He never abandons us. And so we begin to see this when we see Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve are the first characters we run into in the Old Testament. In the book of Genesis. Now, the book of Genesis literally means the beginning. And so in the very, very beginning, God made man and woman. Their names were Adam and Eve. And so Adam and Eve, you may know the story of Adam and Eve. They were created with all these beautiful things. God created the earth. He made it so beautiful. He gave them good food to eat. He gave them animals to sustain them, and they were supposed to take care of everything in this Garden of Eden. But unfortunately, because they had free will, they had the ability to choose things that are good. They also, at the same time, had the ability to choose things that were not so good. And so, instead of listening to God when God told them that they couldn't eat from this one particular tree, they decided to lose their trust in God a little bit. And they ended up choosing something that God did not want for them. And through that, original sin came into the world. And I think we've all kind of experienced, we can't put all the blame on Adam and Eve because, you know, we all, at times in our life, we've chosen things that we know that God doesn't think is good for us. And so Adam and Eve experienced this, and original sin comes into the world. But don't worry, that's not the end of the story, and that's the good news. The good news is that throughout the Old Testament, even though we as humans walk away from God all the time, God never abandons us. He continues to renew his covenant over and over throughout the Old Testament. And ultimately, with Jesus, he sends us a new and everlasting covenant that we'll talk about at the end. Now, The first guy that we're going to talk about after Adam and Eve is Noah. Noah teaches us about obedience and the importance of saying yes to God. And this is really important because Noah comes right after Adam and Eve, who weren't really obedient to God and didn't really say yes to him when he asked them for something. But God still loved Adam and Eve even after they disobeyed him. And he promised to send a Savior to make up for their sin so that Adam and Eve and all the people in the world would have a chance to go to heaven one day. But God didn't tell us when the Savior was going to come, so we didn't know. So they were sitting and waiting, and they were trying to be good. They were trying to wait on the Savior. They had to wait many, many years for him to come. And after a while, people started to become tired of being good and listening to God and following what he was asking them to do, and they forgot about God. And soon there was only one family that still loved God, and this was the family of Noah. Noah was asked by God to build an ark, this huge boat, this really big boat, and put every kind of animal, male, female animal, inside the ark along with his family. And Noah and his family also entered this ark. Because of Noah's trust and his obedience, God was able to save the goodness of creation. God washed away all that was bad and sinful from the earth in a flood. So Noah responds to God with obedience because God asked him to build this ark so that the good of creation would be saved during this flood, and he listened to him. Now, I don't know about you, but if I went out into my backyard and I started to build this huge ark, people would probably think I was a little bit crazy. But Noah didn't care about all of that. He listened to what God said, and he did what he knew was right. And we can do this in a similar way, right? As we wait for Jesus at the end of time, Jesus asks us to believe in God and obey him, to continue to come back to him even when we mess up, as we wait for a Savior. And people throughout the whole Old Testament, up until Jesus came, had to do the same thing. They had to be patient, and they had to believe in God and obey him and constantly come back to him so that they would be ready for Jesus to come, so that we too will be ready for Jesus to come one day. As God promised, the chosen people grew to be very many. So from Abraham, many, many, many years later, we get Moses, who is one of the Hebrews, one of the many members of Abraham's descendants. And years after Abraham died, kind of a bad thing happened to the Hebrews. They all got sold into slavery in the land of Egypt. But God appointed for them a leader. He never abandoned them, right? And this leader's name was Moses. And with God's help, Moses was able to free the people from Egypt. And he led them out of Egypt, and he gave them a promised land for them to live in. They just had to make a really long journey to this promised land. Now, I don't know what is the longest road trip you've ever been on. Maybe you can talk about that amongst yourselves. What's the longest road trip you've ever been on? But Moses, I guarantee you, beat you all by a long shot. Because Moses and his people took a 40-year-long road trip in the desert to get to this promised land that God had promised to them. So they were wandering in the desert, and God continually showed his people, the Hebrews, that they were important to him, that he loved them very much, and he continued to provide for them over and over and over again. He wanted to show them how much he loved them. But in return, God, because we are in a covenant relationship with God, both people have to be active in the covenant. And so the people needed to show God that they loved him by the way that they acted in their daily life, just like we do. We show God that we love him by the things that, we do in response to God's love for us, right? We don't earn God's love. There's nothing that we can do to make God love us. God just loves us automatically. But in response to that love, sometimes we should try to do good things that show God that we love him. And that's what he wanted the Hebrews to do. And so he gave them special guidance to be able to do that. He sent Moses the 10 Commandments. We have this little guy right here with his 10 Commandments. God sent Moses the 10 Commandments, which are guidelines for us to be able to live in a way that shows God that we love him and we want to serve him. They're called the 10 Commandments. They're God's law of love. They're not a list of rules to make us sad, to make us miserable, to make our lives hard. They're rules to help us love God better. Because through God's law, we're able to better live out our call to be children of God. And all of us, as we get baptized, as most of you are probably baptized, we're children of God, and we want to live out that call really, really well. And so the 10 Commandments, if you look at them, they help us not only to love God in the first couple, they show us how to love God, but they show us how to love each other, because we're all part of this universal church, and we want to live in communion not only with God, but with each other. So why did God give Moses and his people the 10 Commandments? He wanted to give them instructions as they waited for this Savior to come. And you can see from these stories, our Jewish ancestors were definitely in need of a Savior, as we all are. And God promised them that he would send someone, and we know who that is, right? Jesus. Jesus is our Savior, who's coming not only at the end of the Old Testament, in the New Testament, which you're about to learn about, but he's coming at the end of the time. He's coming for all of us in our trials and our struggles. And so when we look at the Old Testament, it's really just a reminder of when we struggle with sin, when we struggle with hard things in our lives, that God never abandons us. He's always has his Savior in place for us, who desires our love and who desires to love us and to be in relationship with us.